The rain pounded against the windows of the small suburban home, the same house that had once been filled with the sounds of laughter, slammed doors, and the chaos of family life. Inside, a middle-aged couple sat at their polished dining table. Richard and Margaret Whitmore, once the picture of suburban success, were older now, their hair peppered with gray, their eyes tired from years of regret and unspoken truths. They weren't expecting company that evening, let alone the kind that would change everything. A sharp knock on the door startled them both. Richard frowned, standing slowly. Who on earth comes by unannounced at this hour? Margaret set her teacup down, her fingers trembling slightly. Maybe a delivery, she whispered, but when Richard opened the door he froze. Standing on the porch was a tall man in a crisp black coat, his posture confident yet calm. His eyes, piercing familiar and unshakably steady, were the first thing Richard recognized. "Hello, Dad," the man said softly. Richard's heart thudded in his chest. Behind the man stood a woman, older, kind-faced, her hands clasped together nervously. She wasn't a stranger either. Margaret gasped, her voice breaking. "Ethan," she whispered. The man nodded. "It's been 12 years. The couple's world tilted. Their son, the boy they had kicked out at barely 17, was standing in front of them again. But what shook them more was not just his return. It was the woman beside him. It was Grace, their former nanny, the one who had cared for Ethan when they were too busy building careers, too proud to notice their son slipping through the cracks. The woman they had dismissed without thanks when she quit, furious at how Ethan had been treated. Now, here they were together. Richard's throat tightened. What are you doing here?" Ethan's smile was polite but guarded. "I came back to give you something." The past that haunts 12 years earlier, Ethan had been a rebellious teenager. At least, that's what his parents liked to tell people. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He hadn't been bad, just misunderstood. He wanted attention, love, recognition from parents too consumed with business dinners, promotions, and social standing. Grace, the nanny, had been the only one who noticed the boy's loneliness. She would sit with him late at night, listening to his fears, reading him stories even when he was too old for them, and reminding him that kindness mattered more than perfection. But one night, after a heated argument about Ethan's future, Richard had shouted words no parent should ever say. "If you can't live by our rules, then don't live under our roof," and Margaret hadn't stopped him. So Ethan left. Just like that, he had nowhere to go. No money, no plan, just a 17-year-old with a duffel bag and a cracked heart. And that's when Grace stepped in. She found him sitting on a bus stop bench that same night, shivering in the cold. Without hesitation, she took him home. Not because she had much. Her small apartment was barely big enough for herself. But because she couldn't let him face the world alone. She became more than a nanny. She became family. A return no one expected now. Standing in the very house he had been banished from, Ethan carried himself like someone transformed. His voice no longer wavered, his shoulders no longer hunched with shame. The years had forged him into something stronger, and yet there was still softness in his gaze. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, we thought you'd never come back." "You didn't think I'd survive," Ethan replied plainly, his tone neither angry nor bitter, just honest. "But I did, because someone believed in me when you didn't." Grace touched his arm gently, as if to steady him. Richard cleared his throat, trying to recover control. "So why now, after all this time?" Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He placed it on the dining table with deliberate care. Inside was a deed. Richard opened it, scanning the words, his jaw tightening. His eyes shot up. This is our house." Margaret leaned closer, confused. "What do you mean, our house?" Ethan met their gaze steadily. "You lost it 2 months ago. Foreclosure. I bought it." The silence was deafening. They had no idea he even knew. "You bought it?" Margaret whispered. Ethan nodded. "Cash." Richard's face flushed with shame, his voice cracking. You're here to throw it in our faces. To tell us we don't deserve it." Ethan's expression softened in a way they didn't expect. "No, Dad. I'm here to give it back to you." Twists of fate, the words hit harder than any blow. Margaret's knees buckled, and she gripped the back of the chair. "Why would you do that after everything we did to you?" Ethan glanced at Grace, who gave a small nod of encouragement. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "Because I had someone who showed me that bitterness doesn't heal wounds. Grace taught me that kindness is the only thing that breaks the cycle. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to give you the second chance you never gave me." Richard's eyes glistened with tears he tried to hide. He looked at Grace, guilt heavy in his voice. You raised him better than we ever did." Grace shook her head gently. "I didn't raise him. I just reminded him who he already was." Ethan pulled out a second envelope. This one wasn't about property. It was about something else. He slid it across the table. Margaret opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs. Ethan at a university graduation, Ethan standing in front of a new community center, Ethan surrounded by smiling children holding books. "I started a foundation," he explained. "For kids like me. Kids who feel unwanted, kids who get pushed out before they even have a chance. We've opened 3 centers so far." Margaret covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. You became everything we thought you wouldn't." "No," Ethan corrected softly. "I became everything Grace knew I could be." The emotional climax, the room grew heavy with silence, broken only by the rain still tapping against the windows. Richard stood, his hands shaking, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "Son, I don't deserve forgiveness. Not after what I said, not after how we failed you." Ethan's eyes flickered with pain, but he stepped closer. For a long moment, he just looked at the man who had once turned his back on him. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "You're right. You don't deserve it. But sometimes forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it." Richard's chest heaved as he took his son's hand, gripping it like a lifeline. Tears streaked down his face, unrestrained. Margaret moved closer, wrapping her arms around both of them. For the first time in 12 years, the family stood together, not perfect, not healed, but human. And at the edge of the room, Grace smiled quietly, her eyes shimmering. She had no need to step into the embrace. Her place wasn't in the spotlight. It never had been. Her joy came from knowing Ethan had found his way home, not to a house, but to something deeper, a shocking revelation. Just when Richard and Margaret thought their son's return had given them all the closure they could hope for, Ethan spoke again. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice calm but firm. They turned toward him, waiting. Ethan looked at Grace, then back at his parents. "She's not just the woman who saved me. She's family now. I asked her to be my mother. Officially. I had the papers signed last year. Legally, Grace is my guardian." The words hung in the air like thunder. Margaret staggered back, her breath catching. "You replaced us." "No," Ethan replied gently. "I built what I needed. I didn't replace you. I gave myself the love you couldn't give, and I'll never apologize for that." Richard lowered his head, swallowing hard. There was no anger left in him, only humility. Grace's eyes welled with tears. She tried to speak, but Ethan squeezed her hand before she could. "You deserve to be honored for the sacrifices you made, and I wanted the world to know who truly stood by me when no one else did." The uplifting end, for a long time, the house was filled with quiet. Not awkward silence, but something else. Something heavier, something healing. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice fragile. "Ethan, thank you for giving us this chance. We may never earn back what we lost, but "We'll try." Ethan nodded. "That's all I ask." As they sat together, a strange warmth filled the house again, one it hadn't known for over a decade. The storm outside was still raging, but inside, something was beginning to calm. Not everything was fixed. Not everything would be. But there, in that moment, broken people had chosen forgiveness over anger, kindness over bitterness, love over pride, and that choice changed everything.